Okay. Hello, welcome to the Meeting Tent, an ongoing series on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters. Here in his car is Daniel Gill. Wave to us. There you go. He won't be on camera for most of the program because for bandwidth's sake. Michael Andron, Ivana Tenen, and Adele Packer. So today we're going to review a poster on the Meru.org website. And let me put it up. So here's our website, Meru.org, and I'm going to click on graphics, animations, and I'm scrolling down to the poster index to one called
You passed it.
The Shape of Shabbos, King and Queen, 2004. So before we discuss this, however, I want to play a clip of Stan just to kind of set some context before we get into this. This is from our website, meruvideo.com, and it's from the first verse, an introduction to Meru Foundation. It's just a couple of minutes of Stan towards the end. So let me play this.
So that's what we have here. We have a natural, universal gesture language turned into a formal system for recording and playing back meditational exercises, which can become the true basis for a science of consciousness, which in modern terms becomes a religion, or several religions actually. In fact, that's also what this model talks about. This is a wonderful model of everything. By definition, this isn't a jealous God of a petty people who says, my God's bigger and better than your God because it's my God, and it's the one God because I say so. That's not what we're saying here. I'm saying we are starting with a definition of singularity and wholeness. Definitions are not the basis of prejudice. It's a postulate. I'm putting it down to see how good it is. It doesn't give us anything. And if we look for the means of spanning between the one and the many, we have a path that includes everything in the universe. Now, modern physics attempts a bottom-up reconstruction. Take all the diversity we find, all the forces in the world, and pump the energy up until things merge together, and eventually we can extrapolate and find the Big Bang. The one from the many. And I'm saying we can do this abstractly. We can do this topologically in principle, without any electron microscopes and cyclotrons and supercomputers. We can start top-down by definition, start with a singularity, break it up by minimal first distinction, and end up with all there is. This is very controversial material because, in the words of a friendly scholar, it can't be so. And what, of course, he means is that if it is so, then there's a lot of readjustment to make. And I try to explain to people that this really doesn't say anything like I'm right and you're all wrong. It says rather that this is a deeper level that integrates a whole range of material, and it demonstrates mostly that what the scholars have been saying and what the religious people have been saying and what the different religious people have been saying, they've all been right, but in their own contexts. And that if you go deeper, then you find something more common.
So the reason I played that is because we're going into a topic that is strongly within the realms of Judaism, Shabbos, what we call Shabbos, the Sabbath. And I just wanted to point out that, and to remind people that Stan was, I think, what we could call a universalist. Although so much of his research is steeped in Judaism. I mean, the discovery was based on finding something in the Hebrew Torah, which he never expected, and at that time was far from religious, and he took it on as a researcher. But then over the years, the more he found, the more he studied, he realized that, and Levana can tell this story, is that he had a responsibility to take on a certain amount of observance in real life in terms of the Jewish tradition. But here in this particular poster we're looking at today, the shape of Shabbos, Shabbos being the Hebrew word for Sabbath, he's looking at ways of showing how so many elements of the Jewish religion have context in geometric metaphor, and that there's a universal quality to this that could be applied beyond Judaism. So let's look at the poster. And Lavana, do you want to comment on
Sure,
what I
sure.
just?
Yeah. In terms of Stanley's universalism, in a sense, he was always assuming that anyone, any human who thinks deeply about our nature will understand that there's a unity, a unifying nature. And actually, Bill, there's a poem that Stanley wrote that's very, very short, that I think I would like to read because it explains his point of view. So give me a moment and let me get it. This poem, he wrote back in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, kind of around the same time as this poster was created. It's called The One No Thing, and it was actually published in an extremely orthodox publication, which we both found interesting at the time that they accepted it. And it's a response to a particular prayer in the Hebrew literature, which a lot of people have problems with if they think about it. It's a prayer called the Aleinu, and the phrase that he's responding to, it says, "And it is said, Hashem, the four-letter name, will be king over all the world. On that day, Hashem will be one, and his name will be one." Well, what does that mean? Does that mean everybody's going to be Jewish? No. Does that mean we're right and everybody else is wrong? No, not that either. Here's what Stan wrote. The one no thing. Because everything is finite, the infinite one must be no thing, that is, not countable, as all things are countable. By this means, the all alone, undifferentiated into things one, which is no thing, becomes the God of many different faiths. The unaccountability of no thing, neither one thing, nor many things, nor any number of things, is the cosmic loophole that allows the same one to be exclusively all alone in each faith, yet still the uncountable one over all. The lives of all the heroes are as claimed for them, because a hero, by definition, climbs steadily, ever more upward, where all climbing paths must converge, guided in every choice by the one not a thing as their pole and as their star. Thus, the hero of every culture, the embryo of the one no thing, finds the way home.
Wow, that's beautiful.
That's very nice.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you
And
send me a copy of that, Lavana?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll
That
put
that's
in.
that yeah that that is that's where Stanley really was at. Even in the periods of our life when we were most conforming to an observant lifestyle, this was still how he perceived the universe and beyond, if you want to get technical about it. So with that, bearing that in mind, here, this poster, The Shape of Shabbos, King and Queen, he created while we were immersed in the Jewish world and needed to speak to how our work was connected and how thinking geometrically was relevant to the traditions that we saw and observed, particularly in this case, the idea that the world was created in 6 days and on the seventh day God rested. Well, what in the world does that mean? Or what out of this world does that mean? And actually, there is a quote at the very bottom of this poster. I kind of took a look at the poster before we started here, that explains the point that Stan wanted to make and illustrate. This is from Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah, page 164. And Kaplan says, as explained by the Maharal of Prague, he was a very famous Kabbalist in the 14th century. The Maharal of Prague states that the reason why the world was created in 6 days is because a three-dimensional world has 6 directions, as the Sefer Yetzirah states here. In other words, up, down, left, right, up, down, left, right, and front, back. Just interrupting the Maharal for a moment, that's a point that I've been trying to make, for several weeks. I keep coming back to it, that geometry is where we as human beings live. And this is the Maharal making the same point. The reason why the world was created in 6 days is because a three-dimensional world has 6 directions, as the Sefer Yetzirah states here. Each day was necessary to complete one of these 6 directions. The Sabbath is then the center point, which binds all together and supports them all.
Yeah.
Now,
So let's take a look at the poster.
Look at the poster, right.
Before we do, I think Adele, you had a comment.
I was just responding to the poem and the idea that in dream analysis, you have these archetypal images. And anytime you have an image in a dream where you're going up a ladder, you're climbing stairs, you're going to one room, you're reaching to get to the next room. Any of these archetypal images of elevating are very spiritual dreams where you're reaching for a higher spiritual level. So I was just thinking, that's not one particular ethnicity or religious group. These are typical of all humans have a capacity to reach upward. And there was just something in his poem that just lent itself to how universal these ideas are and how all the messages of the letters are universal. They're human strivings, they're offerings, a pathway to move in a certain direction. And I could go on about Sefer Yetzirah because I've just finished studying it and I'm rereading it and looking at all my notes from a course I just took, and these 4 directions. It's clear that the image of a temple or a house, there's a structure, there's a frame, and yet for each direction of the frame, it's going infinitely in east-west or north-south or up-down, and there's no, it's still a mystical idea, even though it's a geometric shape. So that's where we go back to Stan and look at this poster, and we'll all just see where these shapes have possibility for mystical thinking. They're not stagnant. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's take a look. And Daniel, you're going to have to do this from memory.
I already did. I already did. I pulled over already and looked at it.
Oh, okay. Well, is there any comments you want to make based on what we've talked about so far? Or
No, I think I'll wait. It's there's the poster's very, very intriguing. So
yeah. So as you guys know, when we enter into Shabbat on Friday night. The prayer is L'cha Dodi, where we are greeting a queen, is it not?
Mhm. Yeah.
Bride.
The
Yeah.
bride, the
Queen,
bride.
bride,
Yeah, the queen.
And so that's what we're looking at the top of this poster. Um, he's breaking down the actual letters of Shabbat, Shin Bet Tav, and as we go down, we look at again, looking at the words themselves, breaking down the words because each letter has a meaning. And we're looking at the word for day, which is Yom, Yud Vav Mem, final Mem. And he shows that as expanse, line, and point, and very graphical, as you can see.
what he's doing there, the drawing on the top, the circle in yellow with the line from the radius out, that's a two-dimensional diagram based on the meanings of the letters. You know, the yud as the point, that's the one on the right of those three letters. The vav as being a line, and it looks like a line. And the final mem, which is that third letter, the leftmost letter, means in the geometric way that he is thinking of these letters, it means expanse. So okay, you've got this circle with the radius, but then right underneath it is a glyph that basically pulls that diagram into 3 dimensions. And that's where he starts to get the metaphor of the king. You know, a dean, pedestal, which is what he's regarding that central vertical line as in this diagram. I had actually, you know, I was familiar, obviously, with the term, you know, Shabbos queen, Shabbos bride, daughter. And I was wondering where he got the king from because I couldn't remember. It's been a long time. And then we go down to the next drawing where you see the Shushan flower, which is something that we've talked about a lot on the right-hand side. And then you see basically you can think of it as 6 of those little trumpet-shaped figures, you know, arranged in a circle. You know, find what it's the kind of figure that, you know, okay, you can see it. 6 around one, and there's something in the center. Well, if you relate it to the Shushan flower, what I had forgotten, and here's a connection that's not explicit on this poster, unless you're familiar with the Jewish calendar. There's a holiday called Purim, which is set in, it tells a story that happens in a city called Shushan Habira, which that particular city was the capital of the kingdom in which that story takes place. This is the story of Queen Esther, if you're familiar with the Bible. And so the center point of a Shushan flower in, you know, well, relating that to Shushan Habira, which was the capital of the kingdom, that is where he gets the idea of the king in terms of king and queen. As I say, I had forgotten that connection myself until I looked at it and pieced it through. So I figure it might not be obvious to everybody unless you know the background and how he found relationships in some degree based on the geometry of the words involved. I think I should probably let other people talk at this point.
Yeah, anybody, go ahead. If something stands out on this poster. The one thing I did notice, though, when you were talking about the pedestal, that it is a kind of a, well, 2-dimensional / 3-dimensional depiction of the inverted T.
Yeah, it's the same idea.
So that's
Daniel?
just,
Yeah, I saw, I saw it recently, it's a very old Kabbalistic book, concept of the emergent quality of, of God that we've talked about. The emergent quality of God from a minion, but it also relates to the inverted T model, really. It's from the book called The Gates of Light, and he explains there that at the top sits me, which means who, the English word who. And then at the bottom sits the opposite, which is Yam, the expanse. Interestingly enough, he talks about this is how God works basically in the world. Is this emerging from this relationship of the absolute highest to the most basic, fundamental, like physicality. It's all. I mean, that little diagram that he has at the top there, with the pedestal, and it looks like, it looks like an upside down, almost funnel, or kind of triangle. That's classical kind of Kabbalistic thought, or very, very old thought. I don't think he knew that, but he knew it instinctively. And the concept of the queen is very, very important. It's the basically the highest approximation in human consciousness. The highest we can get is God as the queen, right? As a feminine figure, meaning one in classical feminine. This has nothing to do with modern notions of feminism or the opposite or anything like that. It's just not even an analogy, just a way that human beings' language can try to apprehend something which is way, way beyond that. So the very highest we can ever get is God as the queen, as the sustainer, and the giving, the one who's giving sustenance to everyone, and kind of the same way that a mother kind of tries to guide her children on a path, in a sense, more directly. And then this is, again, nothing to do with the modern world or the ancient world, just as a metaphor, an idea, getting her children, all of her children, onto a path that fits them. And so this is the image that the concept of God as queen, which is what's going on the Sabbath. On Shabbat, we are saying God is, and so it's not a lower concept. It's the highest concept that we can actually get to as human beings. And there's a concept of God above that, which is king, which has to do with the crown, but it's untouchable. Like we cannot grasp it as conscious beings. The closest we can get is God as queen, which is why the Sabbath sits at the, Shabbos sits at the center, because it's the most it's the most we can ever hope for in terms of having a relationship with God. And so therefore on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we eat and we have a good time, and we're with our families, and we drink a little. You have to drink a little bit, so to speak, if you're able. And if you're not able to drink, you don't have to. But it's just, if you're able to have a little wine, you really are obligated to drink wine. You're obligated to. It's just it's a day that has to do with both deep meaning and thinking about your life and reflecting and being with the ones you love. And it's also about enjoyment and being joyful and drinking and eating and just being with your family. And it's so it's kind of like, again, it's this concept of the highest, and yet it's the most approachable way we can we can actually be in contact with God. Yeah.
I want to jump on something that you just said in terms of these, in regard to these terms that are being used, king, queen, and not to be taken in the literal sense.
100%.
And you know, when you look at a Hebrew prayer book, and you look at the English translations, and you see those terms used a lot, our King, our Lord, and you know, when these prayers were written many years ago, over the centuries, a king and a queen and royalty meant a lot. I mean, the king, if you lived in a country, the king was the center of everything. Today, we don't really follow that. It doesn't, it's kind of meaningless, but it's not the noun king. These are all verbs. We always have to remember that. And that's how Stan looked at these terms, that they were not static terms. It was kinging, what a king does, queening, what a queen does. So you have to look at it in those perspectives. The other thing is getting back to that pedestal that we were looking at. It kind of falls into what Stan was saying on that video, where he was saying, you know, we don't have, modern physics looks at everything from a top up, looking for the unified theory, looking from the bottom and moving up. And here we're looking at from what Stan was describing as from the top down, from the point to all there is. And so that's another illustration of what he was just talking about on the video. Michael, did you want to comment?
In respect to the idea of kinging and queening as verbs, built into the word Shabbos is a verb, which is shave, which means sit, as is indicated in the middle section there. Sits in shave, king sits in Shabbos, sits in King Shabbos, and sits in the circle. One of the later, well, still in the early phase, I think he was the grandson or great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who started the Hasidic movement. He talked about the word shave as that whenever it appears, Nachman of Bratslav said, whenever the word shave, sit, appears, it implies to sit for a long period of time. And he brings examples from Abraham, who sat at the opening of his tent. He had the tent open on four sides, always to welcome people into the tent and teach them. And Mordechai in the book of Esther, also sat at the gate of the king, referring not to the physical king, Achashverosh or Ahasuerus. How do they pronounce it in English? Ahasuerus. It's close, yeah. But rather, sitting at the threshold, it meant to sit for a long time in meditation. That was the specific thing that Rav Nachman said. And that's important because we who are within Judaism see a tremendous number of rules and things to do. And for a lot of people, when they look at being observant, it's a little overwhelming at the beginning that there are so many things that we're supposed to do. But of all the commandments in the 10 Commandments, there's only one that's that kind of ritual. There's only one ritual commandment in the 10 Commandments, and that's the Sabbath. All of the others, the first three deal with having no other gods before you and not making idols and not swearing by God's name. And the fifth one, and again, the count here is different in Christianity. The fifth one is honor your father and your mother, which they're saying is there because man is partners with God in creating life. And the remaining five on the left side, when you're looking at the tablets, are all the, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, don't, that sort of thing. But those are not rituals. Those are just behavioral guidance points. The only ritual is the Sabbath. And that idea of sitting for a long time, he brings as a source, as I recall, I was looking for it earlier when I took out the chart, is that it said that we sat at Kadesh, which was one of the places in the 40 years of wandering in the desert. We were at Kadesh for 38 of the 40 years. People think we were just going and going and going and going, but that's not the way the story is, according to the rabbis. They were actually looking at the time frame. And we spent most of our time in this place, Kadesh. And Kadesh is not only a place there, but is also the word Kodesh is the word for holiness. And that's part of the Sabbath, is being in harmony with each other and with God, rather than trying to overwhelm it, to create it, to do something, to change it. And so all the restrictions on the Sabbath, and there seem to be an awful lot of them, are all based on what we did to build the tabernacle in the desert. To carve something, to cut something, all of those things that we're not supposed to do are things that were creative as such. The creation is done, and now just sit and be in it. And it's sitting. It's a verb rather than a noun. And so people who today it would probably say just, for 25 hours, don't look at screens.
Well, unplug.
Unplugging would be the verb
Right.
for 25 hours. And frankly, for people who are not interested in the religious side, there's a lot of psychological benefit to just unplugging for 25 hours.
Well, if you look at our history, or just human history, up to the technological age, I guess people did work 7 days a week, if they had to. And so if you're the creator and you're creating, you're godding, you say, hey, wait a minute, look, I'm going to give you a day off. In fact, I'm going to make you, if you want to follow me, you have to take a day off. I mean, if you had a job like that where you had to work 7 days a week and they made you take a day off, and what you're going to do, what are you going to do on that day off? Well, you're going to think of creation, of what I did as a creator and our relationship. And you're going to put all that other stuff aside and you're just going to take that day. I mean, to people that, Jewish people back then, it must have been a blessing. Sure, gladly. I'll close the store. I'll put down the hoe and the farm and all that stuff, and we'll take a day off. And, but it was for the spiritual growth of the people, is that, yeah, you're always thinking of God, but now take a day off, put the ego away, and say some prayers and let's commune. And that's what people are striving to do who are observant today. And there are many, the percentage is pretty low. If you go to Israel, it's not that big a thing. Most people go to the beach, but it has a huge, significant impact on not only the history, but as we live today. Yeah, Lavana.
Yeah, just, as Michael said, that there are psychological benefits, there are physical benefits. One thing I personally noticed that I'm sure particularly people who weren't always observant, who start to observe the Sabbath in whatever way makes sense to them, one thing that I became aware of was counting on that day. This day, this seventh day is going to happen. I will have this day. And even that reduces cortisol. It reduces,
Yep.
even during a difficult week, I know, yes, there are a bunch of things that I need to prepare ahead of time. That's part of it, because once the day happens, you simply live through the day and do what you do to be aware of whatever it is that's in your consciousness, you know.
I always pictured Stan, on Shabbat, you guys sitting there with a stack of Post-its. Because if
Right,
you
because you
look at,
can't write.
can't write, but he can study. And I'm sure a lot of inspiration and a lot of things came out by the fact that he was forced to sit and look through these volumes. And that's when he found a lot of these great insights.
The key is to remember what the Post-it was there for.
Well,
That's the hard part. I have stuck Post-its on plenty of times and then said, what part of this page did I put this here for?
Exactly.
Oh, he used to put a second Post-it right underneath the line that mattered to him.
Aha. Well, that's good. Yeah.
So that worked. And the trick was then when Shabbos was over, then he would tell me, oh, write this up, write that up, write this up, write
Quickly
that
before I
up.
forget. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Quickly before I forget, you know.
Very
So
well.
but yes, you're right. There were an enormous number of immensely fruitful discussions that happened after Shabbos had been around for a few hours and he'd had time to look and to think. So yeah.
You know, there's an interesting element that in Hebrew we don't have words like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's Yom Rishon LeShabbat is Sunday, the first day of the Sabbath, towards Sabbath. Yom Rishon or Yom Sheni LeShabbat is Monday. Yom Shlishi, this is the third day toward the Sabbath. And if you had a particularly good crop and you came across this wonderful fruit that you picked during the week, so, okay, this I'm putting aside for the Sabbath. The whole week was geared to this. It wasn't just Sabbathing or sitting on that one day, but everything was focused like a road. All roads lead to Rome, is it the expression? All roads in the Jewish world led to the Sabbath, to that time of just being in harmony with nature and God and your family and so on.
And the day off.
And Post-its.
Today, people, if you have a job today, you're always looking forward to the day off. When's my day off?
Yeah.
Adele, you had a comment. You can't hear you.
Thank you. I was thinking of what the rabbis say, that we're never more than 3 days away from Shabbat, because it's either 2 days after Shabbat or 3 days after Shabbat, or it's 2 days until Shabbat. And then you think of that sort of Shabbat consciousness all week, and you think of this geometric idea that Shabbat is in the center of all of the walls, of all of the geometry of up, down, forward, back. And it makes sense to see it as a geometric concept as opposed to a linear concept of I'm either before or after it along a line. It's really just bring the line around a circle and put Shabbat in the center. Or
you're only one radius from wherever you are,
right,
to the center of the sphere.
Mm-hmm. And the other thought I had while you all were talking about this Shav being within Shabbat, and how astute Stan was to point that out on his poster as well, and that this verb of sitting and this idea of kinging and queening, I put that together. That's my day to king or queen, right? To be at rest. What a privilege. And that we're directed to do that for our animals, especially the animals that are working for us, the oxen and the horses, and a day off for anybody who's working for us. And that was very clear in Torah, that it was for all creation to have that opportunity to rest and restore in whatever way the person can do that. And I think it's a pretty universal offering that came out through our heritage and this concept of Shabbat. And I'm sure it parallels many other cultures and traditions that choose a day of the week to be holy. The way we eat or the way we observe would be different than the rest of the week.
Right. Daniel, did you have a comment?
Yeah, it's important. It's definitely one of the things that the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, brought into the world was that Shabbat is not all or nothing. If you look in the Talmudic tractate that discusses the laws of Shabbat, of the Sabbath, it's so in depth and so detailed that it's beyond. It's people spend whole lifetime studying it. There's still more to understand about the law. So the depth to which you could not do things and the depth to which you could restrict yourself. Yeah. So the depth to which you can withhold from doing or restrict yourself from doing is profound. It's enormous. But that's not the beginning. The beginning of keeping Shabbat is starting with something that you enjoy, and that could give others joy, and start with that and do that on Shabbat. And from there, just see where it takes you. And that's kind of what the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world is the focus of Shabbat is not the restrictions, although that can be important as one goes on, but it doesn't necessarily have.
I think you're cutting out again, Daniel, but I think
Okay.
we got the gist of what you're saying. And that was reinforced by the Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, who also said the same thing in terms of, don't be so fanatic about it, make it enjoyable. There are people who would go, oh, I got to do everything exactly this way and make everybody around them miserable. And he said, no, that's not what you do. You do the best you can. So, and today we look at that, okay, if you want to attend Shabbat services with your friends, then you can drive. Okay, drive, if you have to. Drive a car, which was forbidden. So you adjust to make it meaningful to you and your family. Well, we've really explored this topic, and it's good that we were able to take this the poster. We got into the geometric metaphor, but we were able to expand it in a real life perspective, and I hope people got a lot out of this, because I think and for those watching, I hope that everybody does take a day off and try to unplug and kind of concentrate on what's important and what's universal. So for today, though, we have to say goodbye, and we thank you for watching. And Daniel, drive carefully, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.